When you think about entertainment, there's one name that comes up more than anyone else. And if you're watching a channel like this, you probably already know the answer. Disney has recently become sort of a super media giant, buying up IP, other studios, and whole conglomerates. It can go toe-to-toe with the likes of Comcast and Netflix. Its movies are hugely successful, and its parks are the most popular in the world. There's not much that it can't do these days. Some people even think it's gone too powerful. I made a video on that, so check that out. I'll put a link in the description below. Whatever your thoughts on it, it's clear that Disney is a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't always like this though. Like any company, Disney has had ups and downs over the 96 years it's been around. One of these downs in particular almost led to the acquisition and breakup of the entire Disney company. It was the closest Disney has come to total defeat. It's quite the tale, but before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Saul Steinberg was a businessman who had a knack for making money on Wall Street. He first got rich in the mid-1960s after starting LeaseCo, a company that leased IBM computers. He grew LeaseCo to the point that he used its stock to buy Reliance Insurance, a 150-year-old insurance company, in 1968. After buying Reliance, he formed Reliance Group Holdings, a company made to, hold other companies. Usually this would happen through acquisitions. But Saul became known for hostile takeovers, which are basically acquisitions, but made against the wishes of the management. In 1969, he tried to take over Chemical Bank, which back then was one of America's largest financial institutions. After a long and hard battle, Chemical managed to avoid being bought, but it was such a cocky move that Steinberg became known around Wall Street for his arrogance. After his scheme failed, he spent the 70s building up Reliance and getting even richer. There's more to his story, but we'll check back with him in a bit. Meanwhile, the Walt Disney Company wasn't doing so hot in the 70s and early 80s. See, Walt died in 1966, and the years after that proved to be very hard for the company. After the loss of somebody as important as Walt, the prevailing motion was, what would Walt do? But Walt had no equal, and it showed. The company tried to copy him, but they didn't really get what made him so special. Walt's style was to continuously experiment and try new things in new industries, whereas the Disney company of the 70s relied on trying the same things in the same industries, even when the market had changed. They had a few hits in the 70s like The Rescuers and Robin Hood, but most of their output made mediocre returns. The studio tried some new things, like Tron, which was heavy in special effects that were groundbreaking for its time. The horror movie Watcher in the Woods, not something you would expect from Disney. Dragon Slayer, a mature movie known for its groundbreaking dragon effects. But none of these could actually break Disney out of its movie slump. Disney Channel did come out in 1983. That was a nice success. Tokyo Disneyland opened up the same year, which only added to the very successful Parks division. Actually, it's important to note that by 1984, 70% of Disney's income came from parks, and only about 20% came from films. For years, management focused on parks at the expense of the movies. This left an all-around weaker company, with President Ron Miller and Chairman of the Board Ray Watson unsure of where to go. President Ron Miller was the son-in-law of Walt Disney, and was personally trained by Walt, though Ron was indecisive and had no direction. The depressing state of the Disney studios made Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew, leave the board in March 1984. He wanted to find help to change the management and save the studios. Just a few weeks after he left, Saul Steinberg set his sights on Disney. With lots of cash and low debt, Disney was undervalued in the stock market. Saul saw a company he could buy and flip for major returns. His company, Reliance Holdings, started to buy shares that month, and the race to control Disney was on. As soon as Saul made his intentions public, Ron Miller and Ray Watson started acquiring companies so that they could create more stock, so that Saul would have a smaller stake. This prevented Saul from owning more than 10%, but he was not going to give up that easily. Saul and Reliance Holdings continued to buy shares of Disney throughout that spring. As they built their momentum and increased their stakes, the takeover rumors caused Disney stock to steadily rise that spring, which is common when a company is close to being acquired. Saul and Reliance planned to perform a hostile takeover of Disney, but they weren't just interested in flipping it anymore. There was a perception at the time that the parts of Disney were worth more than the whole. And there was truth to this, honestly, with the very weak film division. So Saul wanted to sell off pieces of it for profit. Remember, these were not rich times for Disney. Saul's plan would have effectively doomed the company. He wanted to sell off the Disney Studios and film library to one investor and sell off Disneyland to another. Take a moment to digest that. Can you imagine if Disneyland and Disney movies were two separate things? I could definitely see the owner not knowing exactly how to use these assets and leaving these individual pieces to just fade away. The Disney spirit would be lost among the different divisions and the different owners. It's just a really bad idea all around. By early June, Reliance Holdings had almost gotten 49% of Disney, meaning it could finally take control over the company. But at the last minute, Disney bought back Reliance's shares for $298 million, a $32 million profit for Saul Steinberg. They also paid Saul $28 million as a premium to cover his costs and agree not to try to scheme again. If that sounds like blackmail to you, it literally is. Only on Wall Street, it's called greenmail. In any case, with that purchase, the Disney company had prevented a hostile takeover, and Saul had been defeated. But at what cost? Even though Disney had beat Saul, and I say beat in the lightest sense of the word, shareholders were not happy with the management. Saul Steinberg had barged in and bought a ton of shares over a few months, causing Disney's stock price to skyrocket. He was threatening to buy up the company and break it apart. He only stopped because Disney turned around and bought out his stake for $32 million more than what he paid for it, and gave him another $28 million to keep him away. That's $60 million of profit, and that's in 1984. In 2019 money, that's more like $150 million. Paying greenmail is never a good thing. And that's not all. As soon as Disney bought Saul's shares, the stock price went down, causing great loss to the rest of the shareholders and investors. It was a disaster for the management of the company, but their reckoning was soon to arrive. See, throughout the takeover attempt, Roy Disney had been looking for help. The last thing he wanted was some corporate raider to buy up his uncle's company and scatter it into the wind. Luckily, he found Sid Bass, a billionaire investor. Sid Bass was what the finance world calls a white knight, a person who buys a piece of a company to prevent a bad actor, like Saul, from buying the whole thing and running it into the ground for profit. Sid bought 18.7% of Disney to keep it away from Saul, and now that his danger was gone, Roy and Sid had a bone to pick with the Disney board. They used their influence to fire Ron Miller and Ray Watson to bring in the team of Michael Eisner and Frank Wells as CEO and president, respectively. Eisner and Wells would start rebuilding the company with a new focus on animation, network television, and mature movies. But that's a story for another video. For now, though, I can say that, thankfully, Disney has never returned to the lows of that takeover attempt. It's learned its lesson and is now a behemoth in its own right, acquiring huge companies that once would have bought Disney itself. Speaking of acquiring Disney, though, the company actually was almost bought out in 1984, but not by Saul Steinberg. See, Disney was so insistent on escaping Saul and Reliance Holdings that they almost sold themselves to Universal Studios' parent company at the time, MCA. Lew Wasserman, CEO of MCA, which owned Universal, was just inches away from buying Disney as Steinberg crept closer and closer. The deal only failed because Wasserman didn't agree to make Ron Miller president of MCA after this merger of the two companies. I guess he saw Ron as responsible for Disney's current situation, and he didn't want that in the leadership of his company. Whatever the reason was, though, despite almost dooming the company, Ron Miller did inadvertently prevent Disney from being a part of Universal. Just imagine if Disney was part of Universal today. What kind of a world would we be living in? There'd be no minions, that's for sure. Maybe that wasn't such a bad idea after all. Oh, what am I saying? There you have it, folks. The story of Disney's near destruction and subsequent new lease on life. This is a pretty obscure episode in Disney history, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Could you imagine a time where Disney was being bullied around by a rogue investor? What would a broken up Disney even be like? Would it have faded into history? Let me know in the comments below. I'm on a quest to build the most comprehensive Disney YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe for more Disney videos. Well, that's all I have for now. See you later.